This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 27th of May 2021, and I am 2J.
I'm 2M.
And I'm GK. In case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, TSC spells doom for education graduates. In the Standard, rumble in Mount Kenya. And in the Star, East versus West, Mount Kenya headed for nasty political split.
Now, today, President Uhuru Kenyatta led country in prayer at the National Prayer Breakfast in Parliament. When the prayers ended, I got the sense that the political temperatures are down and the country was calm. President Uhuru Kenyatta did not seem vengeful. He seemed like a man full of grace, a man willing to let the past go and forge a new path ahead. And the path he seems to be headed is a path of national unity. And the only way to achieve this is through a government of national unity. But before I say why, allow me to recite a Sunday school story for you. One day, a blind man went to Jesus for healing. Jesus opened his eyes, but the man complained that his vision was hazy. To make his vision clear, Jesus had to spit. Then he mixed his spit with mud and applied it on the man's eyes. When the man washed the spit from his eyes, his vision became perfect. Kenya, after the 2017 election, is like this blind man. We went to the carpenter from Nazareth for healing. Then he gave us a handshake. But after the handshake, our national vision was hazy. Now, Jesus has to spit on our eyes. And if he does so, the hazy vision of the handshake will become as clear as day. What will we see when we open our eyes is government of national unity. And we support this vision.
Nice. And in order to support the government of unity, I have some thoughts. So the National Prayer Breakfast left me feeling reflective that the time has come for handshake number 2. One between Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. It seems like an odd time to propose a truce, but this is the exact type of jolt that the political system needs. The second handshake does not have to mean the death of politics, but it can harness our collective energies towards some greater good for this country. So for President Uhuru, it is a chance to continue with his legacy of handshaking. And this second handshake would not be clandestine like the first handshake between Uhuru and Raila. This time, it should be done in the open. In order for the second handshake to be transformational, as it were, it requires that the president adopts a virtue of moderation. So according to David Brooks in his book, The Road to Character, moderation is not just about finding the midpoint between two opposing issues and then planting yourself in the middle. It is about acknowledging that conflict is inevitable. The recognition that not all political goals can be met all at once. We are told that politics is a tradition of conflicts. So if Kenyatta wants to be a good moderate, then he will come to understand that he can only hope to achieve a balance that is consistent with the needs of the moment, what this country needs. And a good moderate knows he or she cannot have it all. And what's in it for Ruto? Well, a second handshake would serve him well because he's in the current state of fragility. This is because he has more to lose than to gain. With no political heavyweights as allies, Ruto has based his current campaign on the perceived strength of the electorate, the masses. He now has a chance to focus on this electorate, those few who actually choose the leaders. And finally, the handshake is not about what we want as Kenyans. It is about what we do not want. A second handshake is a way in which we can hit reset. Similarly to the collective sigh of relief we all sort of had when handshake 1 happened and tear gas Mondays stopped. The lesson here, and my main argument for this second handshake, is that nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone.
GK, handshake 1 happened 2012 with William Ruto. Handshake 2 with Raila Odinga.
So this handshake 3?
Handshake 3 is?
Yeah, no, I beg to differ, but that's fine. We can debate that another day. To me, this would be the second handshake.
Second monumental handshake, I guess.
Yeah.
So the National Prayer Breakfast is usually held on the last Thursday of May before Madaraka Day on June the 1st. And it borrows from the United States event of the same name, where politicians, religious leaders, and business patrons come together to take stock of the soul of the nation. So it's actually been 2 years since the last prayer breakfast happened, owing to the COVID-19 period. And I was quite curious to take stock myself of the remarks made in 2019 and those made today. For the Deputy President, I think the Holy Spirit captured his imagination this morning. In 2019, he complained that he was being judged harshly for donating money to churches. This was playing the victim, if you ask me. And 2 years, a lot has changed. Today, the DP seems to have finally caught up with the narrative that Uhuru Kenyatta has been pushing. He said, and I quote, "As things stand today, the Tanga Tanga tours are not there, and the reggae has stopped. Maybe God is speaking to us and saying, let us reason together." Now, I don't believe that reggae has stopped, but indeed it is apparent that Tanga Tanga are in the midst of a power struggle.
Beautiful.
In my view, only time can test the strength of the hustler narrative.
Yes.
And so far it isn't holding up.
Yes.
Externally, it preaches bottom up.
Yes.
But internally, the truth is that it is a top-down system with a wolf at the top.
Oh my goodness.
But I believe that Uhuru Kenyatta has created an environment that is focused on national unity, as both GK and 2M have said, that anybody would be foolish to counter.
Yes.
So if the last 3 years have solidified the success of the handshake doctrine, this year's prayer breakfast confirmed that the president has taken that responsibility head on. In fact, the theme of this year was of a hopeful future. And I really enjoyed that the president kept it short and sweet. He is sticking to his script of transformation in Kenya for all Kenyans. And I'm pretty sure that the Madaraka Day sentiments will echo this transformative legacy that the president is building.
I like that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
So on that note, do we have a winning headline? We normally have a 3-part criteria that we use to break them down. We ask ourselves, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? Is it thoughtful or just plain lazy?
I think the day was taken over
By the national,
By the National Prayer Breakfast.
Yeah? So no winning headlines.
Yeah.
And now our final thought. It is inspired by a book entitled On Heroes, Hero Worship and the Heroic in History by Thomas Carlyle.
Yeah, so just a little bit of a reminder what we've been focusing on this week. This book represents Thomas Carlyle's idea that all of history is the making of great persons, gifted with supreme power, vision, or action. According to him, only when persons of heroic temperament step forward to lead the masses can true progress for society occur. So according to Carlyle, the hero as divinity and the hero as prophet, I believe the team looked at that yesterday, these are productions of old ages. They're not to be repeated in the new. He says that the progress of scientific knowledge puts an end to that type of thinking. The divinity and the prophet are in the past, but that the poet is a heroic figure that belongs to all ages. So in this chapter, he looks at William Shakespeare and Dante, and I'll focus on Dante first. So he was a fairly well-educated man. He was intelligent and hardworking, and he rose to be one of the chief magistrates in Florence, Italy. But his life was also marked by suffering and loneliness. So his poem, The Divine Comedy, is a piece of landmark Italian literature and among the greatest works of all medieval European literature. It is a Christian vision of humankind's eternal destiny. So on its most personal level, it draws on Dante's own experience of exile from his native city of Florence. And on another level, it may be read as an allegory, taking the form of a journey through hell, into purgatory, and then ultimately paradise. So this epic poem is divided into 3 parts, as I said: the Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. So the Inferno is a description of hell. Purgatorio describes how souls experience remorse and repentance as they are purged of their sins in hell. While Paradiso is a description of a world of beauty, light, and song. You can liken it to heaven. And so this is where Dante meets Beatrice, the girl who he loves but he could not marry. So quite interestingly, Dante wrote this poem in the vernacular. He opted to write it in the Tuscan dialect, which was accessible to the masses, rather than writing in the traditional Latin that was reserved for the most educated readers. And because of this unorthodox approach, he inspired Italian writers, while his depictions of hell, purgatory, and heaven had a profound influence on Western art. And it's because of this sincerity that he has as he writes, that he touches the reader's heart. The purpose of this work, Dante wrote, was to convert a corrupt society to righteousness. He said to remove those living in this life from a state of misery and lead them to a state of felicity. And this is why Thomas Carlyle gives praise for the Divine Comedy and gives Dante that role as a hero poet, because this work he wrote kind of lives through the ages. I believe it's 650 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you believe I had never heard of Dante?
Really?
Thank God for the final thought.
You know, if you compare this chapter and that of yesterday on Prophet Muhammad, you will realize that this man may have been dealing with some issues as he was writing his lectures, because these were actually lectures.
Yes.
The way the chapter begins, it says divinity as hero and prophet as hero. No, divinity as hero and prophet as hero would never happen again. And I think is a tad bit salty. And I say this because Carlyle, in short, is telling us that Dante and Shakespeare's work or works did not matter in the context of going through a renaissance. That mankind had advanced to the point where he no longer stooped too low for such intellectual things. That's what he says. Then on the flip side, Carlyle talks about Dante and Shakespeare, not because of the greatness of their poetry, but because of the greatness of their lives. I mean, how can you be so contradictory? And you know, that they don't matter in the age of Renaissance, but their lives was great. Anyway, when he compares both Shakespeare and Carlyle, I mean, when Shakespeare and Dante, Carlyle says that that Shakespeare gave us a practice of body, whereas Dante gave us the faith or soul. Now, Shakespeare worked as a Renaissance was unfolding, which gave him advantages Dante did not have. Although the mark of a great poet was great work produced in a civilized age. That's what he's saying. Though in myself, I wonder how it's easy for a poet to produce great work in the dark age than the civilized age. But I will not go too much into it. Now, Carlyle believes Shakespeare could have done so much more than he did in terms of politics or public leadership. The greatness of his verse demonstrates this. In the end, he says, yet Shakespeare was greater than Dante in that he fought truly and did conquer. Now, guys, the question I asked myself throughout as I read this chapter is, if Dante and Shakespeare did not matter, why did he write about them anyway?
I'm not entirely sure which book you were reading.
I read the same chapter you read.
Oh man,
That's
okay.
yet to be confirmed, but anyway.
So what I liked about...
Okay, if you think I did not know what chapter I read, then tell me why. Answer the question.
Oh, I think the audience can also help us.
They can.
So what I liked about Carlyle's distilling of Dante and Shakespeare and why poets should be heroes was that he gave the comparison, which I liked. He said the prophet in the previous chapter reveals what the society ought to do, but the poet reveals what the people ought to love. And he says that Dante and Shakespeare really embodied a spirit of their time.
Yeah.
They really embodied and empathized with, through character, how people should feel about society at the time, so I like that. But I like the fact that he said that a poet is a man of intellect, but he's also a man of sincerity and vision. And then he makes this distinction of Shakespeare, which is who I largely focused on, because I like Shakespeare. But also he says that Shakespeare was a hero because he outgrew such humble beginnings. And he outlived sort of 400 or so, however many years. We still remember him. We still use his phrases, and we still use some of his characters and all that stuff in modern day literature and stuff like that. And so what was interesting was the amount of phrases that you use that you actually don't know came from Shakespeare. So I'll give you a few. If you've ever been in a pickle, or waited with bated breath, or gone on a wild goose chase, you've been quoting from The Tempest, The Merchant of Venice, and Romeo and Juliet, respectively.
Yes.
If you've ever said there's method in my madness, that comes from Hamlet in an act in a phrase by Polonius, who says, though this be madness, yet there is method in it. And I think Professor likes to use that phrase a lot. If you've ever said break the ice, that was from The Taming of the Shrew. And that was Tranio saying, and if you break the ice and do this feat, So there's lots of words and phrases that we use now.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Carlyle says. He says the fact that Shakespeare's words and plays have transcended time and even nations. You know, there's a fall of the British Empire. There's so many things, but Shakespeare has embodied what the English stand for, and he has outlasted it. And in that way, he becomes a hero. I think that's what I got from it. The other thing I really liked was Shakespeare's ability to overcome, to tell his story using comedy. So a lot of scenes are really tragic, but if you've ever watched a Shakespeare play, you always end up laughing at some bits. And it's the idea that the audience ends up retaining some empathy for the characters, but it also drives the message home. They say some of the funniest people, some of the funniest comedians have sort of the darkest lives. If you look at Dave Chappelle and people like that, or Richard Pryor, they told these jokes, made us laugh, but they were also giving us a very real vision of what society is like at that time. And I think Shakespeare did that really well. So I'll end with this.
GK read the book.
I did. It was a hard read, by the way.
But GK is actually agreed with me because this man, this color man, if you read Muhammad yesterday, I don't know whether you read 2J. If you read Muhammad yesterday, this man bastardized the Quran. At the same time, he gave so many accolades to Prophet Muhammad. And I was like, how do you bastardize the Quran? And yet, you bastardize the mother-law, and yet you give the Prophet so much accolades. Just wait, I'm not done yet. Now, at the same time, you bastardize, what's his name, Shakespeare and Dante. At the same time, you say that they were great. I'm not saying they were great. I actually think Shakespeare is fantastic. But then why contradict it in that manner?
I don't think
and that's my point.
I don't think it's contradiction. I think it's the objective of the book. And the reason why he identifies heroes is because he's trying to look at what the individual contributed. So yes, he may bastardize the Quran. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but give praise to Muhammad because he was looking at the hero as a prophet.
So now you're giving a fantastic argument. Instead of saying I did not read the book, now you can tell where I'm going. Your GK finish.
Well, I had more thoughts, but it's
please. I don't even.
Okay, I wanted to conclude with maybe another book that may help kind of bridge the gap between Carlyle's very old school writing and something more modern. And it's one of my favorite books. It's written by Eric Hoffer. It's called True Believer. And it talks about individuals in the same way who are able to create a revolution. And I think that I would equate the hero as today is the hero as poet with the man of words. So for Eric Hoffer, he talks about how for a revolution or for ideas to spread, you have to have a person, an intellectual, who can articulate the views of the people. It's not so much to just have a person who bears the flag of UDA and whatnot. You have to have somebody who can write a manifesto that clearly expresses what the people want.
So
you agree with me too,
Excellent. I do.
So we can agree that every generation sort of is in debt to Shakespeare and what he's done for the English language. And I want to end with this scene from The Merchants of Venice, which is one of my favorites. And Shylock has a promise to Solanio and Salarino in Act 3, and he says, "If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge?" So I like that phrase. But listen, ignorance is the curse of God. Knowledge is the wing wherewith we fly to heaven. So damage some ignorance. Read this book. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Find us on YouTube, sorry. Find us on TV, on GoTV, Frank Peter, and Sasha is this panel today.
Good.